The air in Richard Eastwood's study was thick with the scent of expensive cedar and the cold finality of a closing door. Eric Williams stood by the mahogany desk, his knuckles were white. Across from him, Richard Eastwood, the man whose silverware Eric's mother had polished for 20 years, didn't look like a grieving father. He looked like a man closing a business deal. "Sit down, Eric," Richard said. The politeness was a blade. "I'd prefer to stand, Mr. Eastwood," Eric replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline roaring in his ears. Richard didn't argue. He simply opened a leather checkbook. $10 million. That is the number I've assigned to your silence. You leave River City tonight. You never call Gina again. You become a ghost. Eric felt a hollow laugh climb his throat. 10 million? Is that what 2 years of my life is worth to you? Don't be a fool, Richard snapped, his composure finally fraying. You are the housekeeper's son. My daughter is an Eastwood. You were a summer distraction that lasted too long. I am offering you a future. Take the 10 million and go. No, Eric said. Richard's pen paused. He looked up, eyes narrowing. 15 million. The answer is still no. $20 million, Eric. Richard slammed his hand on the desk. Think of your mother. Think of the life you could give her. You would turn that down for a girl who doesn't even see you? My mother gave me my dignity, Mr. Eastwood. Eric said, his voice dropping to a whisper that commanded the room. She spent 20 years in this house keeping your secrets. I won't sell the only thing she actually owns back to the man who profited from her labor. Eric turned toward the door, but Richard's voice stopped him, cold and prophetic. She's already forgotten you, Eric. She's with Dylan right now. Do you really think you're anything more than a placeholder for a man who actually belongs in her world? Eric didn't answer. He walked out into the rain, the $20 million check still sitting on the desk like a discarded napkin. He headed toward the sunroom, needing to see Gina one last time, needing to tell her he had chosen her over the money. But as he reached the open windows of the sunroom, the sound of laughter stopped him cold. Gina was inside with her friends. He's so sweet, really. Gina's voice drifted out, light and airy, devoid of the weight he felt in his chest. But honestly, I only asked him to wear those white shirts because Dylan always wore them. In the right light, if I didn't look too closely, I could almost pretend it was him. A tray of crystal glasses shattered in Eric's mind. Every I love you, every secret promise, every white shirt he had carefully ironed for her. It wasn't for him. He was a costume for a ghost. Eric stepped out of the shadows and into the light of the sunroom. The laughter died instantly. Gina's face went pale as she saw the man she had just dismantled standing there, still wearing the white shirt she had picked out for him. Eric, she gasped. I didn't see you there. I know, Eric said, his voice sounding like it was coming from 1,000 miles away. You haven't seen me for 2 years. The humiliation of the sunroom had been a wound, but the university gala was a massacre. Eric had tried to stay away, but a frantic text from Gina had pulled him back. Please, Eric. Dylan is drunk. He's hurting me. Meet me behind the East Wing. Despite the betrayal, the 4 years of devotion he felt for the girl who had once picked him up in the rain wouldn't let him stay away. He found them in the shadows of the stone pillars. Dylan, the golden boy of River City, had Gina pinned against the wall. Get your hands off her, Eric shouted, charging forward. He pulled Dylan away. It wasn't a fight, it was a rescue. Dylan stumbled back, his eyes glazed with gin and malice. Gina was sobbing, her dress torn at the shoulder. Eric, thank God, Gina whispered, clutching his arm. Then the flashlights hit them. What is going on here? It was Richard Eastwood's voice, booming with the authority of a god. Beside him was the university principal. Eric stepped forward to explain, to tell them how Dylan had attacked her. But Dylan was faster. He collapsed to the ground, clutching his stomach, his face contorting into a mask of pure agony. He attacked her. Dylan gasped, pointing a shaking finger at Eric. I tried to stop him. He was trying to rape her. The word hung in the air like a noose. Eric looked at Gina, waiting for her to speak. Waiting for the girl he had protected to tell the truth. Gina? Her father asked, his voice trembling with rage. Is this true? Did Eric Williams do this to you? Gina looked at Dylan, then at her father, then finally at Eric. Her eyes were wide, calculating. If she told the truth, the Eastwood name would be dragged through a scandal with a drunk Dylan. If she lied, Eric was just the housekeeper's son. He was scaring me, Daddy, Gina whispered, her voice barely audible. I was so frightened. Eric, he wouldn't let me go. Eric felt the cold click of handcuffs on his wrists before he could even process the words. As the police led him away, he saw Dylan wink at him from behind Richard Eastwood's back. The silence of the Valora studio was not the hollow, ringing silence of a jail cell. It was the dense, weighted silence of creation. Eric Williams, now known only as Mr. Eric, stood before a canvas that spanned the height of the room. In his hand was a palette knife, not a brush. He didn't paint with strokes, he painted with scars. Behind him, the door creaked open. He didn't turn, he knew the rhythm of those footsteps. The light is fading, Eric, Deborah Beamer said softly. She placed a tray with a simple breakfast on a low wooden stool, a ritual she had maintained since his 3rd month in the program. You've been standing there since 4 a.m. Even the ghosts in your paintings need to sleep. Eric finally lowered his arm. His muscles ached, a grounding physical pain that kept the memories of River City at bay. He turned to look at her. Deborah wasn't like the women in River City. She didn't look at him as a variable in an equation or a substitute for someone else. She saw him. Professor Shaw says the Vienna exhibition curators are calling again, Deborah continued, her eyes fixed on his face, searching for the man behind the focus. They're calling you a historic talent, the youngest recipient of the Clyde Welsh Prize in History. Do you even care? I care about the work, Deborah, Eric said, his voice raspy from hours of disuse. The titles are just noise. The noise is getting louder, she countered. She stepped closer, her presence a warm contrast to the cold stone walls of the studio. A representative from a firm in River City has been calling my office. They want to commission a centerpiece for their new cultural development project. They're offering a sum that would make the Clyde Welsh Prize look like pocket change. Eric's hand tightened around the palette knife. River City? The Beltran Group, she said, watching him carefully. Specifically, a man named Richard Eastwood. He says he has an eye for valuable assets, and he's determined to acquire you. Eric felt a cold, familiar iron settle in his chest. Richard Eastwood, the man who had offered him $20 million to disappear, and then ensured he was shamed out of town when he refused to sell his soul. Did he give a name for the project? Eric asked, his voice deathly quiet. He calls it the Monument of Integrity, Deborah replied. Eric let out a short, jagged laugh. Integrity. He's buying a monument for something he doesn't possess. I can decline, Deborah said, stepping into his space. She reached out, her fingers hovering near his arm. You don't have to go back to that place, Eric. You've built a life here, a life that belongs to you. Eric looked at the canvas. It was a study of a white shirt, rendered in such stark, haunting detail that it looked like a shroud. For 3 years, he had lived as a ghost in Valora, a closed environment where he had severed every tie to his past to survive. He had sent money to his mother, enough to pull her out of the Beltran estate, but he had never looked back. Not once, until now. No, Eric said, turning back to the canvas. Tell them Mr. Eric is interested. But I have conditions. Conditions? I won't deal with their lawyers or their middlemen, Eric said, his eyes flashing with a light Deborah hadn't seen before. If Richard Eastwood wants my work, he has to send a personal representative, someone who can speak for the family's values. He suggested his daughter, Deborah noted, reading from her tablet. Gina Eastwood. He thinks a personal touch will win you over. The name hit Eric like a physical blow. Gina, the girl who had looked him in the eye and told the world he was a harasser to protect her golden boy lover. The girl who had used him as a mannequin for another man's memory. Perfect, Eric whispered. Eric, Deborah's voice was full of warning. Is this about the art, or is this about something else? Eric walked to the window, looking out over the Valora skyline. He was no longer the housekeeper's son standing in the rain. He was the man the world was chasing. It's about the ending, Deborah, Eric said. Every story needs one. He picked up a phone on the desk, the one he had kept in a drawer for 3 years. He powered it on. The screen flickered to life, showing a missed notification from a lifetime ago, a message from a version of himself that no longer existed. He hit a button, and the studio was suddenly filled with the sound of a song. The song he had written for Gina's birthday, the one she had called Wishful Thinking. He listened to his own younger, more naive voice for 10 seconds before silencing it. "Tell the Beltran group I'll meet them," Eric said to Deborah, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. "But tell them the meeting won't be in a boardroom. I want them to see me where they think I belong." The Veracity Art Gallery was a cavern of light, glass, and the hushed murmurs of people who bought art not for the beauty of the canvas, but for the weight it added to their social portfolios. Eric Williams stood on the mezzanine, looking down at the sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. 3 years ago, he would have been the one carrying the champagne trays. Tonight, the champagne was being poured in his honor. He was no longer the boy in the rain. His frame had filled out, his posture carried the ironclad certainty of a man who had survived a public execution of his character, and his face, once open and vulnerable, was now a masterpiece of controlled indifference. "They're circling like sharks, Eric," Deborah said, stepping up beside him. She looked stunning in a deep emerald gown, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the crowd. "The Beltran Group has 3 representatives here. They don't just want a painting. They want the prestige of owning the man who painted it." Eric's gaze fixed on a familiar shock of blonde hair near the centerpiece. Gina. She was laughing at something a man was saying, her head tilted back in that practiced, effortless way that used to make Eric's heart stop. Beside her stood Dylan, his hand possessively on the small of her back. "They don't know," Eric said, his voice a low vibration. "They're looking for Mr. Eric. They have no idea they're looking for a ghost they tried to bury." "Richard Eastwood has authorized a blank check for the Monument of Integrity project," Deborah whispered, checking her tablet. "He sent Gina to make the initial pitch. He thinks a beautiful woman is his best negotiating tactic." "He always did underestimate the value of things he couldn't buy," Eric replied. He began to descend the stairs. The movement was calculated. He didn't rush. He moved with the unhurried directness of a man who knew exactly where he was going. As he reached the floor, the crowd parted. The Mr. Eric enigma was finally taking shape. He saw the moment Gina noticed him. It wasn't an immediate recognition. It was a slow, agonizing dawn. She stopped mid-sentence, her champagne glass trembling. To her, Eric Williams was a lowlife who had disappeared into the shadows of a scandal. But the man walking toward her was wearing a suit that cost more than her car, and the way the gallery directors bowed to him suggested a power she couldn't fathom. "Mr. Eric?" she breathed as he came to a halt 3 feet away. Her voice was the same, light, airy, and dangerous. Eric didn't smile. He didn't acknowledge the flicker of Eric in her eyes. "Miss Eastwood, I presume? Your father has been very persistent." Dylan stepped forward, his face reddening. He didn't see the artist. He saw the housekeeper's son in a costume. "What is this, Eric? What the hell are you doing here? This is a private event for people who understand the value of a name, Dylan," Eric interrupted, his voice cutting through Dylan's bluster like a razor. He finally looked at Dylan, and the sheer coldness in his eyes made the other man stumble back a half step. "I'm here because my name is on the wall. Why are you here? To remind everyone of the integrity you're currently trying to commission from me?" "You? You're Mr. Eric?" Gina gasped. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She looked at the paintings, the haunting studies of white shirts, the fractured portraits of betrayal. She had thought they were abstract. Now she realized they were a ledger of her own sins. "The Beltran Group wants a centerpiece," Eric said, his tone conversational and deadly. "A monument to integrity. It's a fascinating choice for a family that uses false accusations as a social currency." "Eric, please," Gina whispered, her eyes darting around the room as people began to stare. "We can talk about this. The birthday dinner, the university, it was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding that involved an arrest?" Eric asked. "A misunderstanding that saw my mother fired after 20 years of service?" "We can make it right," Gina said, stepping closer, reaching out an impulsive hand. "The 20 million. My father is willing to double it now. For the commission. For everything." Eric looked down at her hand, then back up at her face. For the first time in 3 years, he saw her clearly. She wasn't a girl in the rain. She was a woman trying to buy her way out of a ghost story. "You're still looking through me, Gina," Eric said. "You're still trying to find a version of this story where you aren't the villain, but I'm not wearing the white shirt anymore." Before Gina could respond, a loud, familiar voice boomed from the entrance. "Where is he? Where is the man of the hour?" Richard Eastwood marched into the room, his arms open, a predatory grin on his face. He walked straight past his stunned daughter and his trembling future son-in-law. He grabbed Eric's hand and shook it vigorously, oblivious to the carnage in the room. "Mr. Eric, a pleasure. I've heard you're the only man who can capture the true spirit of the Eastwood legacy. Name your price. Anything you want, it's yours." Eric let his hand go limp in Richard's grip. He looked past the father to the daughter, whose face was now the color of ash. "Anything, Mr. Eastwood?" Eric asked, his voice carrying across the silent gallery. "Then I want the one thing you told me I could never have." Richard beamed. "And what's that?" Eric leaned in, his whisper audible only to the three people who had destroyed him. "I want to watch you lose everything you think you've bought." The rain had returned to River City, a relentless drumming beat against the roof of the Beltran estate that echoed the storm inside its walls. Gina stood in the center of the foyer, her emerald dress damp at the hem, staring at the closed double doors of her father's study. Inside, she could hear the muffled, frantic pacing of Richard Eastwood. The door flew open. Richard didn't walk out. He stormed out, a glass of amber liquid trembling in his hand. "He's the one," Richard hissed, his face a mottled purple. "The housekeeper's son. The boy who sat in my study and told me that $20 million wasn't enough to buy his soul. He's Mr. Eric." "I tried to tell you, Daddy," Gina whispered, her voice sounding hollow in the cavernous hallway. "I tried to tell you he was familiar." "You didn't try hard enough." Richard slammed his glass onto a marble side table. "I've spent 3 weeks courting an international sensation, putting the Beltran name on the line to partner with him for the Monument of Integrity. Do you have any idea what the press will do when they find out he was the one we had arrested, the one we shamed? It wasn't just we, was it?" A new voice cut through the tension. Dylan emerged from the shadows of the dining room, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his shirt, the inevitable white shirt, wrinkled and stained with sweat. He looked like a man who had seen his own execution and was still trying to negotiate with the headsmen. "We have to fix this, Richard," Dylan said, his eyes darting toward Gina. "If Eric talks, if he tells people what really happened that night at the university." "He already has," Gina said, her voice growing stronger. She pulled out her phone, the screen glowing with a headline from a Vienna art blog that was already going viral in River City. "Mr. Eric declines Beltran partnership, a statement on integrity and lost dignity." "He's not just talking, Dylan," she continued, her eyes fixed on her fiancé. "He's making his silence our loudest confession." "Then we buy his silence again," Richard shouted. 40 million. 50. Every man has a price, Gina. He was just playing hard to get 3 years ago. He was waiting for the market value of his dignity to go up. "He isn't buying, Daddy," Gina said. She walked toward the front door, her hand on the cold brass handle. "And for the first time in my life, I'm not selling." "Where are you going?" Richard demanded. "To do what I should have done 3 years ago," Gina said, turning back. "I'm going to tell the truth about the university, about the rape accusation you helped Dylan craft." Dylan lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "You'll destroy everything, Gina. The merger, my family's name, your own reputation. They'll call you a liar. They'll say you were in on it." Gina looked down at Dylan's hand on her arm, the same hand that had pinned her against the university wall while he was drunk and dangerous. The same hand she had protected by sacrificing the only man who had ever truly seen her. "I was in on it, Dylan," she said, her voice deathly calm. "That's the part I have to live with. But you're the one who has to live with the fact that Eric Williams didn't need a name or a fortune to become the man you'll never be." She wrenched her arm away and walked out into the rain, leaving the two men standing in the fading grandeur of a house built on secrets. As Gina pulled out of the driveway, her headlights caught a figure standing at the edge of the estate gates. It was Deborah Beamer. She wasn't moving, just watching the house with a look of clinical observation. She stepped forward as Gina's car slowed, tapping on the window. He knew you'd come out tonight, Deborah said as Gina lowered the glass. But he didn't send me to stop you. He sent me to give you this. Deborah handed her a small, sealed envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid, a photo of the white shirt Eric had been wearing the night he was arrested, now framed in a gallery in Vienna. On the back, in Eric's precise handwriting, were 4 words. "The debt is settled." Gina looked up, but the gates were empty. Deborah was gone, and in the distance, the sirens of the River City PD were already beginning to wail, heading toward the Beltran estate. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers transformed the meticulously manicured driveway of the Beltran estate into a chaotic strobe light show. For 20 years, these gates had kept the undesirables out. Tonight, they were wide open, welcoming the law into the heart of the sanctuary. Richard Eastwood stood in the center of his foyer, his silk robe thrown hastily over his pajamas. He looked smaller than he had at the gallery, deflated, like an aging actor whose stage lights had suddenly cut out. "This is an outrage," Richard roared, though his voice cracked at the end. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am the chairman of the Beltran Group. I am on the board of—" "Mr. Eastwood, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit perjury and obstruction of justice," the lead detective said, his voice flat and unimpressed. He held up a digital tablet. "We have received a sworn statement from your daughter, Gina Eastwood, along with digital recordings of conversations regarding the framing of Eric Williams 3 years ago." Richard's face went from purple to a ghostly translucent white. "Gina? She wouldn't." "She did, Richard," a voice called out. Dylan walked out of the dining room, but he wasn't the confident heir anymore. He was handcuffed and being led by 2 officers. He looked at Richard with a mixture of terror and betrayal. "They have the texts, Richard. The ones where you told me how to bruise my own stomach to make it look like he attacked me. They have everything." As Richard was led out to the car, the rain soaked through his expensive silk robe, chilling him to the bone. He looked toward the gates, expecting to see a crowd of paparazzi or sympathetic friends. Instead, he saw only one car, a sleek black sedan parked just beyond the property line. Inside the car, Eric Williams watched the man who had tried to buy his soul being pushed into the back of a squad car. "Is it enough?" Deborah asked from the driver's seat. She didn't look at the police, she looked at Eric. "It's justice," Eric said quietly. "But it's not the ending." "The Beltran Group's stock is already plummeting in the overnight markets," Deborah noted, her eyes reflecting the glow of her phone. "By the time the sun rises, the Eastwood name will be a liability. The Monument of Integrity project is officially dead." "Not dead," Eric corrected, a small, cold smile touching his lips. "Repurposed." Gina Eastwood sat in a sterile interrogation room. She had refused a lawyer. She had spent the last 2 hours detailing every lie, every bribe, and every moment of silence that had led to Eric's ruin. She felt a strange, terrifying lightness, as if she were finally shedding a skin that had been suffocating her for years. The door opened. She expected the detective. Instead, it was Eric. He stood in the doorway, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the dark fabric of his suit. He looked like he belonged in a different world, a world Gina no longer had access to. "You actually did it," Eric said, closing the door behind him. "I didn't do it for you, Eric," Gina said, her voice trembling, but her gaze steady. "I did it because I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. I did it because every time I looked at a white shirt, I saw a ghost." "You destroyed your family today, Gina. You know that." "My family destroyed itself the day they decided a housekeeper's son was a disposable asset," she replied. She stood up, her movements jerky. "What happens now? Do you get your satisfaction? Do you watch us all rot in a cell?" Eric walked toward the table. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly tired. "I don't want you to rot, Gina. I want you to remember. I want you to remember the boy who loved you before he knew you were a weapon, and I want you to live with the knowledge of what you threw away for a man like Dylan." "I'll live with it," she whispered. "Every day." "The Beltran estate is going into receivership," Eric said, changing the subject with a clinical coldness. "The bank is seizing it to cover the losses from the stock crash. My firm, the Beamer Williams Group, just bought the debt." Gina gasped. "You bought the house?" "I bought the land," Eric corrected. "The house is coming down. I'm building a gallery there. A place for artists who have no names and no pedigrees. It will be the monument your father wanted, but it won't have his name on it. Eric turned to leave, but Gina's next words stopped him cold. There's one thing the police don't have, Eric. One piece of the puzzle my father kept in a safe that even I couldn't open until tonight. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver key. It's for a locker at the Old West Bridge station. He kept the original security footage from the university that night. The footage he showed everyone was accidentally deleted. The footage that shows you never touched me, and that I was the one who kissed you first. Eric looked at the key. It was the final nail in the coffin of the Eastwood legacy. But as he reached for it, the lights in the precinct flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. From the hallway, a frantic voice shouted, "We have a breach. Someone just let Richard Eastwood out of his cell." The darkness in the precinct was absolute, a heavy, suffocating weight that smelled of ozone and panic. Somewhere in the distance, an emergency generator sputtered to life, casting the hallway in a sickly, flickering red glow. "Stay down," Eric hissed, grabbing Gina's shoulder and pulling her toward the floor as heavy footsteps thundered past the interrogation room door. "Is it my father?" Gina whispered, her voice trembling. "Did he really escape?" "Richard Eastwood doesn't escape on his own," Eric said, his mind racing. "He has friends, people in this city who can't afford for him to testify. If he goes down, the entire board of the Beltran group goes with him." The silver key Gina had given him felt like it was burning a hole in his palm. It was no longer just evidence. It was a target. "We can't stay here," Eric said. He helped her up, his hands steady. "The West Bridge station. Is the locker still there? After 3 years?" "It's a private vault, Eric. He paid for 10 years in advance. He wanted that footage kept as leverage against Dylan's father. He never intended for it to see the light of day unless he needed to destroy his own allies." They slipped out of the room, moving through the chaos of the precinct. Officers were shouting into dead radios, and the smell of smoke was beginning to drift from the server room. This wasn't just a power outage. It was a scorched earth policy. The old train station was a relic of a different era, a Gothic structure of rusted iron and soot-stained stone. It sat at the edge of the city, a place where the shadows seemed to have teeth. Eric and Gina climbed out of the car a block away, moving through the rain-slicked alleyways. The station was abandoned at this hour, the only sound the rhythmic dripping of water from the eaves. "Locker 402, Gina whispered, pointing toward a row of tarnished brass doors tucked behind a defunct ticket booth. Eric inserted the key. It turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk. Inside was a single, unmarked black briefcase. "Open it," Gina urged. Eric flipped the latches. Inside sat a series of high-capacity hard drives and a manila folder filled with legal documents, the original, unedited security logs from the night of the gala. "This is it," Eric said, his voice thick with emotion. "The proof that I was never the monster they made me out to be. It's more than that." A voice boomed from the darkness of the terminal. Eric and Gina spun around. Emerging from the shadows was Richard Eastwood. He wasn't wearing his silk robe anymore. He was in a dark raincoat, his eyes bloodshot and wild, a heavy service pistol held in a shaking hand. Beside him stood Dylan, looking terrified, and two men in suits who looked far too professional to be police officers. "Give me the briefcase, Eric," Richard said, his voice a jagged edge of desperation. "You've had your fun. You've played the world-famous artist. But this is River City, and in this city, the truth is whatever I say it is." "It's over, Richard," Eric said, holding the briefcase firmly. "Gina told them everything. The police are already looking for you." "The police are busy putting out fires," Richard countered, taking a step forward. "Literally. By tomorrow morning, that briefcase will be ashes, and you'll be just another tragic victim of a station robbery, a lowlife who couldn't stay away from trouble." "Daddy, stop." Gina stepped in front of Eric, her arms spread wide. "I'm the one who gave him the key. If you want that briefcase, you have to go through me." Richard's face contorted. The love for his daughter fought with the survival instinct, and for a terrifying second, survival seemed to be winning. His finger tightened on the trigger. "She's bluffing, Richard," Dylan yelled, his voice cracking with cowardice. "Shoot him. If that footage gets out, my life is over." A sharp crack echoed through the station, the sound of a gunshot, but it didn't come from Richard's gun. Richard's pistol flew out of his hand as he cried out in pain. From the upper gallery of the station, more shadows moved. Deborah Beamer stepped into the light of a flickering street lamp, a professional security team flanking her. "The police were busy, Eric," Deborah said, her voice cool and commanding, "so I brought my own." But as the security team moved to apprehend Richard, a loud, grinding roar filled the station. A freight train, unscheduled and moving fast, began to barrel through the center tracks, kicking up a blinding cloud of dust and sparks. In the confusion, Dylan lunged. He didn't go for Eric or the briefcase. He grabbed Gina, hauling her toward the edge of the platform as the train roared past. "If I'm going down, Eric," Dylan screamed over the thunder of the engine, "I'm taking the only thing you ever loved with me." Dylan pulled Gina toward the blurring metal of the passing train. Eric dropped the briefcase, sprinting toward them, his hand outstretched, a scream lost in the roar of the iron giant. The roar of the freight train was a physical wall of sound, vibrating through the soles of Eric's shoes and rattling the very bones of the station. The air was a whirlwind of grit, diesel fumes, and the terrifying scream of metal on metal. In the flickering strobe light of the passing railcars, Eric saw the nightmare unfolding. Dylan had his arm hooked around Gina's neck, dragging her backwards toward the blurring yellow blur of the train. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and devoid of reason. This wasn't a tactical move. It was the final, desperate lunge of a man who had lost his soul and decided to burn the world down with him. "Let her go, Dylan," Eric screamed, though his voice was swallowed by the engine's thunder. "You took it all," Dylan shrieked back, his face inches from Gina's ear. "The name, the money, the future. You're nothing but a housekeeper's son. You don't get to win." Gina struggled, her heels skidding on the rain-slicked concrete. She looked at Eric, not with the calculated coldness of the Eastwood heiress, but with a raw, agonizing clarity. She wasn't fighting for her life, she was looking at the man she had betrayed, finally seeing him through the haze of 3 years of lies. "Eric, save yourself," she mouthed, her voice lost to the wind. Eric didn't hesitate. He didn't think about the briefcase containing his vindication. He didn't think about the global fame or the millions in the bank. He lunged. He tackled Dylan just as the man reached the edge of the yellow safety line. The three of them went down in a heap of limbs and wet wool. The passing train was a vacuum, pulling at their clothes, trying to suck them into the dark space between the wheels. "I'll kill you!" Dylan roared, his hands finding Eric's throat. Eric felt the air vanish. The world began to dim at the edges. He looked up and saw Richard Eastwood standing a few feet away, clutching his bleeding hand, watching his daughter and his golden boy scuffle on the edge of death. Richard didn't move to help. He just watched, his face a mask of horror and paralysis. "Help them!" Deborah's voice rang out. She had cleared the gallery and was sprinting down the stairs, her security team close behind. With a surge of adrenaline born of pure survival, Eric slammed his forehead into Dylan's nose. There was a sickening crunch. Dylan's grip loosened, and Eric rolled, kicking out and sending Dylan sprawling back toward the center of the platform. Eric grabbed Gina's hand, pulling her toward him, shielding her body with his own, as the final car of the freight train rattled past. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the survivors and the distant, fading click-clack of the tracks. "It's over," Eric wheezed, his chest heaving. He didn't let go of Gina's hand. "Not yet," Richard Eastwood whispered. He had picked up the briefcase. He held it against his chest like a holy relic. The professional security team had their weapons trained on him, but Richard looked past them, his eyes fixed on the dark water of the river that ran beneath the West Bridge, just 50 yards from the station exit. "You want your truth, Eric?" Richard said, a ghostly, terrifying smile spreading across his face. "You want the world to know you're a hero? You'll have to fish it out of the Atlantic." Richard turned and bolted toward the bridge. "No!" Gina screamed, breaking away from Eric. They chased him onto the rain-slicked iron of the West Bridge. The wind was howling here, whipping over the black, churning water below. Richard reached the center of the span and climbed onto the railing, holding the briefcase over the abyss. "Daddy, please!" Gina cried, stopping 10 feet away. If you drop that, you're not just destroying Eric, you're destroying me. I gave him that key. I want the truth out. Richard looked at his daughter, and for a second, the old Richard Eastwood, the man who had once bought her a pony and told her she was a queen, flickered in his eyes. I did it for you, Gina, he whispered. Every lie, every bribe. I did it so you would never have to look down at anyone. I wanted you at the top. I don't want to be at the top if it means standing on people's necks, Gina sobbed. Give it to him. Let us be finished with this. Richard looked at the briefcase, then at Eric. The hatred was still there, but it was drowned out by a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. The housekeeper's son, Richard muttered. You really did have more integrity than all of us, didn't you? Richard didn't hand the briefcase to Eric. He didn't drop it into the water. Instead, he looked at Gina one last time, whispered, I'm sorry, my girl, and leaned backwards. He didn't just drop the briefcase, he took it with him. Eric lunged for the railing, his fingers brushing the wet leather of the briefcase just as Richard vanished into the black void of the river. A splash. Then, nothing but the sound of the wind and Gina's piercing scream. Eric stared into the darkness, his heart hammering against his ribs. Suddenly, he felt a sharp, cold pressure against his side. He turned to find Dylan, blood pouring from his broken nose, a jagged piece of rusted metal in his hand. If he's gone, Dylan hissed, his voice a psychotic tremor, then no one gets to leave this bridge. The rusted metal shard in Dylan's hand glinted with a jagged, lethal hunger. His face, smeared with blood and rain, was no longer the face of a socialite. It was the mask of a cornered animal. You think you're the hero now, don't you? Dylan hissed, stepping closer to Eric on the narrow, wind-whipped ledge of the bridge. But the world only remembers the winners, Eric, and I'm going to make sure you're just another cold body in the river. Eric didn't flinch. He looked at the weapon, then up at Dylan's hollow eyes. You've spent your whole life hiding behind Richard Eastwood's shadow, Dylan. Now the shadow is gone. Look at yourself. You're holding a piece of trash on a bridge in the middle of the night. Is this the Golden Boy legacy? Dylan roared and lunged. But Eric had spent 3 years building a life out of nothing, hardening his resolve while Dylan had softened in luxury. Eric stepped inside the swing, parrying Dylan's arm and using the man's own momentum to spin him toward the railing. With a final desperate shove, Eric sent Dylan crashing to the deck of the bridge. Before Dylan could rise, the heavy boots of Deborah's security team swarmed him, pinning him to the iron floor. It's over, Dylan, Deborah said, stepping over the discarded metal shard. Truly this time. Eric turned toward the railing, staring down into the black, churning water where Richard Eastwood had vanished with the briefcase. The silence was heavy. Gina stood a few feet away, her body shaking with silent sobs, her eyes fixed on the spot where her father had disappeared. He took it, she whispered, her voice breaking. He took the truth with him. I'm so sorry, Eric. I'm so sorry. Eric walked to her. He didn't offer a platitude. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He took the hard drives, Gina, Eric said softly. But he forgot one thing. The Monument of Integrity project required me to submit a portfolio of foundational inspirations to the Beltran server last week. He turned the screen toward her. On it was a video file, the security footage from the university. Deborah's team hacked the server the moment the power went out at the precinct, Eric explained. We didn't need the briefcase. We just needed to keep him distracted long enough for the upload to complete to every major news outlet in the country. Gina looked at the screen. She saw herself, 3 years younger, leaning into Eric, kissing him with a desperation she had long tried to deny. She saw Dylan stumble into the frame, drunk and aggressive. She saw the truth. Unfiltered, undeniable, and permanent. It's out, Eric said. The world knows. The grand hall of the museum was packed. This wasn't a gala for the elite. The doors were open to everyone. On the far wall, where the Monument of Integrity was supposed to hang, there was a new installation. It was a triptych of massive canvases. The first was a study of a white shirt, discarded and stained. The second was a portrait of a woman looking through a glass pane, her features blurred. The third was a sunrise over a bridge, rendered in colors so vibrant they seemed to vibrate off the wall. Eric Williams stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. His mother, Margaret, sat in the front row, wearing a dress of silk she had once only been allowed to press for others. Beside her sat Deborah, her hand resting supportively on Margaret's arm. "For a long time I thought my story was about revenge," Eric said into the microphone, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "I thought it was about making the people who hurt me feel the weight of their own lies. But I was wrong." He looked toward the back of the room. A woman stood in the shadows of the pillars, Gina Eastwood. She wasn't wearing emerald silk anymore. She was dressed simply, her face pale, but her expression peaceful. She had spent the last month testifying against the remaining board members of the Beltran Group and liquidating her remaining assets to fund a foundation for the wrongly accused. "This story," Eric continued, "is about what remains when everything else is stripped away. It's about the fact that dignity isn't something you can buy, and it's certainly not something someone else can take from you. It is the masterpiece we paint with our own choices." As the applause swelled, Eric stepped down from the podium. He walked past the cameras, past the billionaire investors, and headed straight to his mother. He took her hand and kissed it. "We're going home, Mom," he whispered. "We are home, Eric," she replied, looking around at the beauty her son had created from his pain. "We finally are." The Beltran name is now a footnote in a legal textbook. Dylan serves his time in a cell where no one cares about his pedigree. But Eric Williams? He doesn't look back. He continues to paint. Not for the clicks, not for the millions, but for the truth. Because in the end, the most viral story isn't the one about the fall. It's the one about the man who refused to stay down. If you followed Eric's journey from the rain to the gallery, remember, your value isn't defined by those who use you. It's defined by the light you carry when the world goes dark. Share this story if you believe in the power of the truth.